Sal locked the deadbolt on the door of his marine electronics shop, and the sound of it landing home felt like a coffin lid closing. I had known Salvador Ruiz for 31 years. We had pulled engines out of dead shrimp boats together in the middle of August heat. We had buried his brother and my wife within 8 months of each other, and we had spent more Sunday mornings than I could count, sitting on the end of Dock 7 with 2 cups of black coffee and nothing to say. Sal did not look like a man who scared easily. Right now he looked like a man who had just watched something crawl out of the water that should not exist. "Walter," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I had never heard from him, not even at his brother's funeral. "Sit down. I need you to sit down before I show you this. My name is Walter Hensley. I am 68 years old." Clear's throat. "For 42 years I built a boat building and marina business up and down the Georgia coast. Starting with one leaking 15-foot skiff, I patched together in my father's carport and ending with a full-service marina, a repair yard, and a custom sport fishing hull line that men flew in from 3 states to order. I have negotiated with union welders who wanted to burn my shop down over a pay dispute. I have rebuilt after 2 hurricanes that should have finished me, and I have sat across folding tables from investors who smiled while they tried to steal my company out from under me in broad daylight. I am not a man who rattles easily, but standing in the back room of Sal's shop, staring at the cracked screen of a smartphone hooked up to his diagnostic rig, I felt something in my chest give way that I did not know was still capable of giving. To understand how I ended up in that back room, staring down a nightmare I could not yet name, you need to go back 2 hours to what had started as an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen island of the Marshfront house in Isle of Palms, the house I had put nearly 80% of the money into, so that my daughter Renee and her husband Preston could have the life I always wanted for her. I had moved in with them 14 months earlier, after a mild stroke left the left side of my face numb for 3 days and scared everyone in my life more than it scared me. They had insisted. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone in that big house on the water by yourself," Renee had said, gripping my hand at the hospital, tears in her eyes that I believed were real, because I had no reason then to believe anything else. I was drinking black coffee and reading the marina's morning maintenance log on my tablet. Preston had already left for whatever it was he did now. He called it consulting, though nobody I knew had ever hired him to consult on anything since his commercial real estate firm collapsed 3 years back, taking $200,000 of other people's money down with it. He had looked worn thin lately, gray around the eyes, a man carrying something heavy he wouldn't name. Renee was pacing behind the island, phone pressed to her ear, her voice pitched low and urgent in a way that did not match the easy, breezy tone she used with her yacht charter clients. She she called it a boutique concierge company, arranging private charters and dockside events for wealthy tourists. She is 39, always polished, always camera ready, with a smile that had gotten wider and more automatic in the last year, even as everything underneath it seemed to be fraying. I did not mean to startle her. I only stood to rinse my mug in the sink. My stool scraped against the tile, sharp in the quiet kitchen, and Renee spun around so fast. Her phone slipped from her hand, struck the edge of the granite counter, and hit the floor with a crack that split the screen into a spiderweb of black glass. She dropped to her knees so fast it frightened me. She snatched the phone up, hands shaking, and the sound she made was not the sound of a person upset about a broken phone. It was closer to a sound of someone watching a bridge collapse. I told her gently it was just a phone, that we'd replace it within the hour. She looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on my daughter's face before, raw, naked terror, and told me I didn't understand, that the phone held client contracts, deposit records, things that could not be reconstructed, that if she lost that data, her whole business could collapse overnight. Watching her fall apart like that, I did what any father would do. I told her to breathe, that I knew exactly who to call. Sal had spent 20 years doing cybersecurity contract work before he retired down to running the little repair shop by the marina just to keep his hands busy. I offered to drive the phone over myself while she used my old spare cell to manage the crisis. She hesitated in a way that struck me, even then, as strange. She held that shattered phone against her chest for a long moment, staring at me with something that looked almost like calculation before the desperation won out. She made me promise Sal wouldn't dig through her personal files, only pull the business data. I told her not to worry about a thing, kissed her forehead, and drove off feeling like a useful old man for the first time in months. 2 hours later, that feeling was dead in the ground. Sal's extraction software doesn't discriminate. It doesn't just recover contacts and client folders. It pulls everything: deleted threads, hidden messaging apps, encrypted backups, the whole buried architecture of a phone's secret life. He had warned me about that once, joking, half serious. People think their phones forget things. They don't. Nothing forgets. "What did you find?" I asked him, and my voice came out thinner than I intended. He didn't answer right away. He turned the monitor toward me with a hand that wasn't quite steady, and pointed to a thread from an unsaved number, logged only as a single letter. C. The first message, timestamped 2 nights earlier, read, "We can't keep stalling. Accounts are staged on my end. Get the trust paperwork signed before he starts asking his lawyer questions again." Renee's reply, sent 40 minutes later. "Trying. Preston's falling apart, and Dad noticed the transfer from the business account Monday. He's been asking about the marina deed." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I had noticed a hole in the marina's operating account 2 days ago, nearly $340,000 gone, which I'd assumed, foolishly, was a bookkeeping error. I had mentioned it at dinner. They had smoothed it over with talk of a slip renovation invoice that hadn't come due yet, and I had believed them, because why on God's earth would I not? But it was the final message on that thread that made the room tilt sideways, and the walls of Sal's cramped back office start to close in around me. "Don't let him near the safe again. Keep upping the dosage in his evening coffee. We need him foggy through the signing. If he pushes back, double it. Upping the dosage. Foggy through the signing. Double it." I stared at those words until they burned themselves into the back of my eyes. The strange, thick confusion I'd been fighting for 3 weeks. The tremor in my hands I'd chalked up to age. The nights I went to bed at 9 and woke at 7, feeling like I hadn't slept at all. It was not the stroke. It was not old age catching up to me the way I had privately dreaded it might. Someone was drugging me in my own home, and the someone doing it was my own daughter. I told Sal to wipe the extraction logs from his machine. Then I told him something I hadn't said to another human being in longer than I could remember, that I was afraid, and that I needed his help. I drove back to Isle of Palms with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind screaming. 42 years of sitting across boardroom tables from men who would have gladly watched my company burn had taught me one thing above everything else. Never let the enemy see you've made the discovery until you've decided exactly what to do with it. I had to walk back into that house and be the fading old man they believed I already was. I found Renee in the foyer when I came through the front door, and I handed her the loaner phone with a story about Sal needing a few days to safely pull the data off her cracked one. I watched her face for a flicker of guilt, a hairline crack in the performance. There wasn't one. She thanked me, called me her hero, hugged me, and disappeared into her office complaining about how far behind she'd fallen. That evening we sat down to dinner, the three of us, under the low gold light of the dining room chandelier. Plates of grilled snapper and asparagus that Renee had prepared with what looked, infuriatingly, like real care. Preston barely touched his food. His color was bad, his eyes glassy, his hands trembling faintly around his fork in a way that matched mine more than I wanted to admit. I waited until the plates were nearly clean before I set the first trap. I mentioned, in the mildest tone I could manage, that I'd been reviewing the marina's books that afternoon, and noticed the missing $340,000 still hadn't been reconciled. I asked Preston directly if he remembered signing off on it. The room went very still. I watched Renee out of the corner of my eye, certain she would flinch. She didn't. She reached over and rested her hand on Preston's arm, her face arranging itself into an expression of gentle, patient concern, and let him answer for both of them. "Dad, we went through this," Preston said, his words slightly slurred with exhaustion. "It's the deposit for the East Marsh Dock expansion. You approved the plans in March. I had never seen any plans. I had built a marina empire on the principle of never signing a dime without 3 sets of eyes on the paperwork, and I would sooner have cut off my own hand than authorize $350,000 without a contractor's bid in front of me. But Preston spoke with the flat, exhausted certainty of a man who genuinely believed what he was saying, and that frightened me more than a lie would have. I told him I didn't recall approving anything of the kind. Renee's hand tightened gently on his forearm. "Dad," she said, soft as a lullaby, "you've had a lot on your plate. It's okay to forget things now and then. We're handling it." I asked how the bank had processed a withdrawal that size without my physical signature. Preston rubbed his face with both hands. "You signed it right here at this table, Dad. 2 weeks ago. Don't you remember?" I did not remember because it had never happened. But the conviction in his voice told me one of two things. Either my signature had been forged with startling precision, or he had been drugged so thoroughly he'd hallucinated a memory that didn't exist. I forced my shoulders to slump, my eyes to go vague, and murmured something about my memory these days. Preston looked at me with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "It's not just age, Dad," he said quietly. "Dr. Calloway said the new blood pressure medication might cause some short-term memory fog while your system adjusts. We just need to be patient with you." I had not seen a doctor named Calloway in my life. I had not had my blood pressure medication changed. The floor seemed to drop out from under the whole evening. I excused myself, claiming fatigue, and climbed the stairs to my room with my heart hammering against my ribs like something trying to break out. Once the door was locked behind me, I stood at the bathroom mirror and looked at the man staring back, a man who had built an empire out of a leaking skiff and a stubborn refusal to quit, now looking, for the first time in his life, genuinely frightened of his own family. I held out my hands. They were shaking, and for the first time in 3 weeks I understood exactly why. Later that night, long after the house had gone dark and silent, I crept down the hall for water I didn't need, mostly to watch. A thin seam of light spilled from under the door of Preston's home office. I eased close enough to look through the gap. He was slumped at his desk, bathed in the blue glow of his monitor, staring at a spreadsheet without typing, his cheekbones sharper than they'd been a month ago, his skin waxy under the light. He looked less like a man plotting against his father-in-law, and more like a man being slowly hollowed out from the inside. Whatever role Preston was playing in this, I did not believe, standing in that hallway, that he understood he was playing it. I went back to my room and did not sleep. By the time the sun came up, I had the beginning of a plan. I came downstairs the next morning carrying a stainless steel travel thermos tucked inside my robe. Renee was at the island running the blender, humming, pouring the thick green mixture into 3 glasses. When she turned to reach into the pantry, I moved my glass 6 inches to the left and swapped its position with the empty one waiting by the sink. A habit, if you want to call it that, 39 years old. My late wife Eleanor and I had a private joke from the earliest days of our marriage. Whoever poured the coffee always secretly switched cups with the other person before either of us took a sip, a silly ritual that started as a joke about trust after a fight early in our marriage, and became, over 4 decades, something closer to a vow. "I'll drink from your cup before you do, always." I hadn't done it in 3 years, not since the funeral. I did it that morning without entirely deciding to, my hands moving on instinct built into me longer than my daughter had been alive. Renee turned back around, smiled, and slid a glass in front of me. "Extra antioxidants today, Dad, for your energy." I thanked her, and when she turned to check the stove, I emptied the contents into the hidden thermos, leaving a thin green film at the bottom of the glass, and waited to see exactly how far my own daughter was willing to go. Preston shuffled in a few minutes later, gray-faced, and drank from the glass. Renee handed him without a second thought. I watched him with a clarity that turned my stomach. Within 20 minutes, the tension went out of his shoulders in that same unnatural way I'd started to recognize, a puppet with the strings freshly cut. His eyelids drooped. When he tried to talk about a meeting later that day, the words dragged together, thick and slurred, and his sharp banker's eyes went dull and glassy and compliant. Renee crossed the kitchen in her heels, laid a manicured hand on his shoulder, and slid a manila folder across the granite. Just the trust amendment for the Marina Holding Company, honey, needs to be filed by noon. Preston didn't read a line of it. He picked up the pen she handed him and signed his name at the bottom without a flicker of resistance. And I watched a piece of our family's 42 years of work disappear under a stranger's ink. I excused myself, claiming my new medication was upsetting my stomach, and went upstairs before my face could betray anything at all. Once my door was locked, I went to the walk-in closet, pulled back the rug, and knelt in front of the floor safe I'd installed a decade earlier to hold my medical directives, the original of my will, and the deed to the Marina building itself. I punched in the 6-digit code, Eleanor's birthday, the same code for 10 years, and the machine answered with a short, mechanical beep and a red light. I tried again. Beep. Red. I pressed my thumb to the biometric pad. Green, then red. Access denied. My own fingerprints had been wiped from my own safe. I sat back on my heels in the closet for a long moment, feeling the exact shape of the trap I was standing in. Then I pulled the loaner phone from my robe pocket and called Nathan Griggs, my private banker of 19 years, a man I'd played golf with more times than I could count. His voice was warm, easy, entirely too cheerful. Walter, good to hear from you. I hope you're resting well. I asked him to confirm the balance on my primary operating accounts and why I hadn't received a statement by mail in 2 months. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking. We processed the change of mailing address you submitted last month, Walter. Notarized request. All statements now go to Renee's business P.O. box, so she can help manage the paperwork while you focus on your health. We also filed the power of attorney documents your attorney sent over. The room tilted again. Power of attorney. Notarized request. I thanked him, blamed my memory, and hung up before the tremor in my voice could give me away. I stood at the bay window and looked out over the marsh. The docks I'd built with my own hands, stretching gold and quiet in the morning light, and understood for the first time that this house, the house I'd paid for out of love, had become a cage with excellent views. That afternoon the front gate chime rang. I watched from the window as a courier stepped out with a thick legal envelope. Renee was occupied out back with the pool crew. I moved down the stairs faster than I had in a year, signed for the package myself, and looked at the return address stamped in the corner, a prominent downtown Savannah law firm, and beneath it, in smaller print, a department name that stopped my heart-cold office of adult guardianship and conservatorship proceedings. She wasn't only stealing my company. She was building a legal case to erase me while I was still breathing. I hid the envelope under my mattress and spent the evening laying the groundwork for a trap of my own. I told Renee my head was pounding, played the frail, fading old man to the hilt, let her fuss over me and carry a fresh smoothie up to my room. The moment the door shut, I poured it down the bathroom sink, left my door unlocked a careful 2 inches, and lay fully dressed on top of the covers waiting. At 2 in the morning, the handle turned. A shadow slid into the room, moving with the silence of someone who had rehearsed this. Renee. She stood by my bed a long moment, watching my slow, deliberate breathing, and then crossed to the nightstand and lifted my tablet, the one that held my banking and email, locked behind a fingerprint I'd never given anyone permission to use. She took my slack right hand in both of hers, guided my thumb to the sensor, and the screen chimed open. I lay perfectly still, while my own daughter drained $41,000 from my personal checking account into a routing number I didn't recognize, deleted the confirmation emails, and set the tablet back exactly where she'd found it. She leaned close before she left, close enough that I could smell her perfume, and whispered, "Just a little longer, old man," before slipping out and pulling the door shut with a soft click. I lay in the dark a long time after that, and the grief that had been sitting on my chest all day burned away into something colder and far more useful. I decided that my greatest weapon was not confrontation. It was her own certainty that she had already won. I gave her the performance of my life over the next several days, the shuffle, the tremor, the vacant stare, dropping a coffee mug at breakfast and calling Renee Martha, my late wife's name, until Preston had to guide me gently to a chair while my daughter watched with barely concealed satisfaction. It worked better than I dared hope. Her guard didn't just lower, it vanished entirely. She stopped lowering her voice on phone calls. She left her burner phone sitting carelessly on the kitchen island while she showered. I began a slow, deliberate afternoon walk to the little park by the marsh, ostensibly for my joints. And on my third trip, Sal sat down on the bench beside me with a newspaper open in front of his face and a small metal cloning device pressed into my palm. 60 seconds in the SIM slot, he murmured. That's all it needs. I got my chance the next morning while Renee vacuumed upstairs. My hands, 70 years old, moved with a steadiness that would have surprised her. I popped the phone case, pulled the card, ran the clone, and had everything back in place before she came down the stairs. Saul called me that evening, his voice tight in a way I'd only heard once before, and told me to meet him at Diane Whitfield's office within the hour. Not the marina, not the park, somewhere secure. I flagged a rideshare 3 blocks from the house, paid cash I'd been hiding in the toe of my shoe for exactly this reason, and arrived at Diane's unmarked glass office building 40 minutes later. Diane had been my corporate attorney for 26 years, a woman who had once made a room full of union negotiators cry without raising her voice. Sal was already in her conference room, pale, hunched over his laptop. I laid out everything: the drugged smoothies, the forged signatures, the wiped safe, the conservatorship envelope hidden under my mattress. Diane didn't offer a word of comfort. She started drafting. Within the hour, she had begun the paperwork for an emergency blind trust, moving the bulk of my liquid holdings, nearly $9 million, beyond Renee's reach before any conservatorship could be finalized. She explained, typing without looking up, that even a forged signature on every domestic account in my name would hit a wall the instant it touched the new trust structure. While she worked, she picked up a second phone and placed a call to a private investigator on permanent retainer, giving him the name of the law firm on the conservatorship envelope and instructions to find out exactly who was handling the filing on Renee's behalf. Sal, meanwhile, had finished decrypting the cloned SIM data. I watched the color drain out of his face as he scrolled, his mouse hand going still. He opened a folder labeled with Preston's initials, closed his laptop halfway, as if trying to physically shield himself from what was on the screen, and looked up at me with an expression of genuine, bone-deep horror. "Walter," he said, "it's worse than the money. You need to see what she's doing to Preston." I leaned toward the glowing screen, bracing myself for the worst thing I could imagine, and found something far worse waiting instead. The folder held months of messages between Renee and an unlicensed compounding pharmacist operating out of a storefront near the Georgia-Florida line. Clinical, detached notes on exact dosing thresholds required to keep a grown man's nervous system suppressed without triggering respiratory failure. She complained, in one message, that Preston was having too many clear-headed mornings and asked for something stronger. Sal slid a sealed envelope across the table. "The thermos you gave me. I sent it to an independent lab outside the state system. Results came back this morning." I opened it with hands that had gone completely steady. The toxicology report used clinical language I didn't fully understand, but the red flags beside the chemical panel needed no medical degree to interpret. Unprescribed benzodiazepines at levels meant for psychiatric sedation. A second, experimental compound designed specifically to impair short-term memory and executive function. She was not simply stealing from us. She was chemically dismantling both our minds, one carefully measured dose at a time, keeping us upright enough to sign our names and too foggy to ask why. The fury that had been building in me for days sharpened into something colder, more useful. I looked at Diane and then at Sal and told them our objective had changed. This was no longer about protecting my money. This was a rescue. Deanne suggested filing an emergency police report immediately, using the lab results to have Renee arrested that night. I shook my head. The chemistry in that report told me why we couldn't move that fast. Preston's body had been chemically dependent on those compounds for months. Cut him off cold with a raid at the front door, and his nervous system could collapse before an ambulance ever reached the driveway. Renee had built a hostage situation into her own poison, whether she'd intended to or not. I had to go back into that house. I had to keep smiling across the breakfast table at the woman drugging us both, and find a way to slowly, carefully pull my son-in-law out of the fog without her ever seeing it happen. I spent the next afternoon at an organic market 2 towns over, buying a dozen bottles of dark green kale and spinach juice that matched Renee's smoothies in color and thickness almost exactly, and hid them behind paint cans in the garage she never entered. The switch began the next morning, and it worked exactly as I needed it to. Every day for the better part of a week, in the 4 or 5 seconds Renee's back was turned, I dumped the poisoned mixture down the disposal and refilled both glasses from the hidden bottles, tapering the real dose down slowly enough that neither of us would collapse from the sudden absence. By the 5th day, Preston's hands had stopped their constant faint tremor. The migraines that had been grinding him down for weeks dulled into something manageable. And on the Thursday morning before everything came to a head, I watched something return to his eyes that had been missing for a long time. Real focus, real suspicion, a flicker of the sharp financial mind that had once made him genuinely good at his job. He looked at the glass Renee slid toward him, and for half a second I saw doubt cross his face. I kicked his shin gently under the table. He caught my eye, pushed the glass away, mumbled something about an upset stomach, and Renee frowned but let it go. Retreating to the patio with her burner phone, the fog had lifted off my son-in-law. Now I had to break his heart wide open before I could save the rest of him. That night, once the house had gone dark and silent, I knocked softly on the guest room door where Preston had taken to sleeping. He opened it looking hollowed out but present, genuinely present, for the first time in months. I put a finger to my lips and led him down the back stairs to the garage, locked the steel door behind us, and turned an old dockside radio up, loud enough to swallow our voices, in case Renee had wired the house the way I now suspected she had. He stood in the middle of the garage with his arms crossed, searching my face for the confused old man he'd been managing for weeks, and finding instead the man who had built a marina empire out of a leaking skiff and pure stubbornness. "Dad, what is this?" he said, his voice low and steady. "You've been acting strange for weeks, and now you drag me down here at midnight. What is happening to us?" I didn't soften it. I pulled back the tarp I'd draped over the workbench and laid out everything under the single bare bulb: the toxicology report, the photographs of forged bank signatures, the private investigator's dossier, and finally surveillance photographs the investigator had pulled of Renee embracing a man I didn't recognize outside a downtown hotel. A man whose name Diane had told me an hour earlier was Corbin Lang, a home health aid license revoked 8 years ago after a federal investigation into elder financial abuse in 3 states, currently operating under a false name as a private caregiver, and Renee's lover for nearly as long as she and Preston had been married. Preston's legs went out from under him. He dropped onto an overturned bucket and put his face in his hands, and the sound that came out of him was not anger yet. It was grief, raw and total, the sound of a man watching every year of his marriage rewrite itself into a lie in real time. I let him have exactly 2 minutes. We didn't have the luxury of more. Tomorrow was Friday, the day Renee had told her lawyer, in a text I'd read over Sal's shoulder that afternoon. She intended to finalize both the conservatorship and the power of attorney at a downtown office, with Corbin Lang standing in as her attorney of record under yet another false credential. I crossed the cold concrete floor, pulled Preston's hands away from his face, and made him look at me. "You can grieve later," I told him. "Right now, I need you to be a Hensley. We are not going to let this woman finish what she started. We're going to walk into that office tomorrow and take everything back. Are you with me?" He wiped his face, and something hardened in his eyes that hadn't been there in months. "I'm with you, Walter." Friday morning broke pale gold over the marsh, and the whole house felt like it was holding its breath. I stood beside Preston in the guest bathroom mirror, our eyes meeting without a word passing between us. There was no fear left in his face anymore, only the same cold resolve I imagined was written across mine. We came down the stairs together, perfectly back in character, my feet dragging, his eyes glazed and slow. Renee was already at the island, the blender running, pouring the thick green mixture into 3 glasses. "Good morning, my sweet boys," she sang, radiant in a way that made my skin crawl. "Big day today. Drink up. We need you both healthy." I gave her my most foolish smile and reached for my glass with a hand I let tremble. Preston stared at his with practiced, sluggish hesitation. When she turned for exactly 4 seconds to grab her burner phone off the counter, I moved, the same motion Sal and I had rehearsed 100 times in my head. The same motion Eleanor and I had turned into a private ritual 39 years earlier, without either of us knowing it would one day save 2 lives. I dumped both glasses down the disposal and refilled them from the flask in my robe before she turned back around. We drank harmless vegetable juice and smiled at her over the rims of our glasses, and she never once looked twice. Perfect, she said, pleased with herself, checking her reflection in the toaster's chrome. Let's go. Big day. The ride into downtown Savannah was suffocating with a silence only I could hear the shape of. Renee had smooth jazz playing low over the speakers, humming along, glancing at us in the rearview mirror with the soft, condescending affection of a woman checking on 2 sedated dogs. Comfortable back there, Dad? We're just going to sign some papers that'll keep you nice and safe. You don't have to worry your tired head about a thing. Just write your name pretty for the nice lawyer, okay? I let a little drool pool at the corner of my mouth and hummed a tuneless note, rocking gently against the seat. Beside me, Preston let his head loll against the window, his breathing slow and shallow, executing his role with a precision that would have made me proud under any other circumstance. We parked in the reserved garage beneath a glass tower downtown and rode a private elevator to the 40th floor, where a receptionist who didn't bother asking our names buzzed us through a set of frosted double doors into a conference room with a panoramic view of the river. Corbin Lang stood at the far end of the table in a tailored navy suit, his dark hair combed back, his smile arranged into something that looked, from a distance, almost like warmth. 2 stacks of documents sat squared and flagged with colored tabs in front of him. The finalized conservatorship order, and beneath it the full transfer of power of attorney over every asset I had left in my own name. Walter, he said, rounding the table with his hand extended, his voice a smooth, professional baritone. It's an honor. Please, sit. Rest. He turned that same practiced warmth on Preston. Good to see you looking so calm today. We let ourselves be guided into the leather chairs facing the documents. Renee stood behind Preston's shoulder, resting her manicured hand between his shoulder blades, with the tenderness of a woman posing for a photograph of a marriage that had never existed. A young paralegal wheeled in a small service cart, a silver carafe, 4 porcelain cups, cream and sugar arranged with unnecessary precision, set it beside the table, and slipped back out. Corbin picked up a heavy gold fountain pen and tapped it twice against the stack of papers, the sound echoing sharp against the glass. Just a few simple signatures today, gentlemen, and everything will be perfectly protected and properly managed going forward. Shall we? Rennie reached for the carafe herself, pouring 4 cups with the eager, trembling anticipation of a woman watching the last obstacle between her and everything she'd ever wanted finally clear itself away. She set 1 cup in front of me and 1 in front of Preston, and picked up her own to take a sip while she waited for me to do the same. I looked down at the coffee steaming gently in front of me, and then I looked up at my daughter, and I did the thing I had done every single morning for 39 years of marriage, without ever once needing to explain it to anyone. I reached across the small gap between us and switched my cup with hers. Renee froze with her own cup halfway to her lips, staring at the swap, not yet understanding what she was looking at. Your father and I used to do this, I said quietly, and my voice came out steady, clear, entirely free of the tremor I'd been performing for 2 weeks, every morning for 39 years. Whoever poured, the other one switched the cups first. It started as a joke about trust after a stupid fight in our first year of marriage. It became a promise. I'll drink from your cup before you do. Always. I picked up the cup that had been hers and drank from it, slow and deliberate, my eyes never leaving her face. The performance ended there, all at once, like a stage light switching off. I let the practiced tremor drain out of my hand. I rolled my shoulders back and sat up to my full height in that leather chair, and I looked at my daughter with the same cold, appraising eyes I'd once used on men who thought they could steal a company out from under me while I wasn't watching. The color went out of Renee's face in one long drop, like something draining from a cracked vessel. I do not think I will be signing anything today, I said, and set the empty cup down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. I have not signed anything for you in 3 weeks, Renee. Every glass, every smoothie, every drop you thought was going into me, I've been pouring it down a drain since the morning I found out what you were doing to us. She stumbled back a step, her mouth opening without sound. Corbin shot to his feet, his practiced warmth curdling instantly into something sharper. Now, Richard Walter, you're confused. This is a legally necessary protective measure for your own. Neither will I, Preston said, and the word cut through the room like a blade. He sat up straight beside me, the sluggish fog gone from his posture entirely, his jaw set, his eyes clear and burning with a fury that had been building under 14 months of poisoned mornings. He looked at his wife with an expression that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. I know what you've been putting in my coffee, Renee. I know about Corbin. I know about the accounts. I know all of it. Renee let out a strangled, disbelieving gasp, one hand flying to her throat. The illusion she had spent months constructing around our entire family came apart in front of her all at once, in real time, with nowhere left to hide it. That was when the frosted glass doors slammed open behind her, hard enough to rattle the framed art on the walls. It was not the paralegal returning with more coffee. It was Diane Whitfield, striding into the room, flanked by 4 federal agents in dark tactical vests, marked with the bright letters of the FBI's white-collar Financial Crimes Division, moving with the calm, overwhelming precision of people who had done this 100 times before. Diane crossed to the head of the table and dropped a thick folder onto the mahogany with a slap that echoed through the room. "Certified toxicology report?" she announced, her voice ringing with total, unbothered authority. "Documenting 7 weeks of unprescribed sedative and cognitive impairing compounds administered to Preston Cole and Walter Hensley without their knowledge or consent." A second folder landed beside it. "Full text and call transcripts recovered from the burner phone you left lying around your own kitchen. Every message coordinating the poisoning, the forged financial documents, and the fraudulent conservatorship filing you're standing in front of right now. A third, heavier, bound in black, and the complete laundering trail linking your shell consulting company to Corbin Lang's identity fraud. Every wire, every shell entity, every dollar you tried to move through Preston's name so he'd take the fall if the money ever got traced." The lead agent stepped forward, his voice flat and final. "Rennie Cole and Corbin Lang, you're both under arrest for wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, aggravated assault by poison, and conspiracy to defraud a federal financial institution." Corbin offered no resistance at all, his shoulders dropping the moment the cuffs closed around his wrists, whatever confidence he'd carried into that room, evaporating instantly into the quiet defeat of a man who'd finally run out of road. Renee did not go quietly. She twisted against the agent's grip, screaming, mascara streaking black down her face, and turned that scream on the one person in the room she thought might still save her. "Preston, Preston, please, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I love you. I was only trying to protect our future. Your father's confused. He's making all of this up." Preston stood slowly, buttoning his jacket, and looked at her the way a man looks at something he's already finished grieving. "You poisoned me," he said, quiet and level. "Every morning, smiling at me while you did it. You tried to have my father-in-law locked away in a medical ward, and you were going to let me take the fall for federal crimes I never committed, so you could disappear with him." He tilted his head toward Corbin, still watching Renee with that same flat, exhausted contempt. "You're nothing to me anymore, Renee. You are completely dead to me." She collapsed against the agent's hold, sobbing as they walked her toward the doors. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I stood, buttoned my own jacket, straightened the cuffs of my sweater, and looked down at the ruined stack of conservatorship papers, ink from my discarded pen bleeding slowly across the top page. "You underestimated the wrong old man," I said quietly, and turned my back on the whole wreckage of it, and walked out into the bright Savannah morning with my son-in-law beside me. 3 months have passed since that morning, in Corbin Lang's borrowed office. Renee and Corbin are both awaiting federal trial in separate facilities. Bail was denied for both, the judge citing the scale of the fraud and the obvious flight risk of two people with hidden accounts scattered across 4 states. Diane made sure the prosecutors had every scrap of evidence they'd ever need. Renee tried briefly to trade testimony against Corbin for a lighter sentence. It didn't work. There was nothing left to trade that Diane hadn't already handed over herself. The marina is fully back under the Hensley name, every trace of the fraudulent trust unwound, every forged signature nullified in court within 6 weeks. Preston finished a full medical detox under real supervision, and he still comes by the docks most mornings, quieter than he used to be, steadier than he's been in years. He's rebuilding, slowly, the way people do after something like this. Not back to who he was, but towards someone new, someone who checks twice before he ever signs anything again. His daughter, my granddaughter, Mila, is 11 now, and she has taken to spending her Saturday mornings with me down at Dock 7, sitting on an overturned bucket, while I show her how to read a hull for stress fractures the way my own father taught me. She asked me once, not long after everything came out, why I hadn't just told someone the moment I found the messages on Sal's screen. I told her that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay perfectly quiet and let someone who's underestimated you finish making their mistake. She thought about that for a long moment, swinging her feet, watching the gulls circle over the water. So you let her think she'd won, she said. So she'd show you everything. Something like that, I told her. She nodded slowly. The way kids do when they've actually understood something instead of just hearing it, and went back to sanding the little skiff we'd been rebuilding together, the one I've decided to name after her grandmother. This afternoon, I'm sitting on the patio with Preston, 2 mugs of real black coffee between us, no green sludge anywhere in sight. He picks up his cup, and out of habit now, out of something we've built together in the wreckage of all this, he switches it with mine before either of us takes a sip. Neither of us says anything about it. We don't have to anymore. Never mistake a quiet man for a foolish one, and never assume that age is the same thing as weakness. The truest power isn't in a raised voice or a slammed door. It's in the patience to wait, to watch, and to act only when the truth can no longer be denied. Protect the people who can't protect themselves. Guard your family's foundation with everything you have, and always, always trust the feeling in your gut before you trust the smile in front of you. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of quiet justice and hard-won peace. Have you ever caught someone underestimating you completely and used it against them? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one. Stay sharp and stay safe.